Everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon for I think, some really cool information on how speed training can really directly affect your on-course performance. Um, I don't know, Tyler. This might be one of my favorite studies we've ever done. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, this was the one that I wanted to start with from day one, but it was so incredibly time consuming and we had to kind of get some other things in a row. But when I was able to do it last summer, man, it's a pretty sweet study.
Yeah, I think one of the big details that we look at whenever we see somebody start speed training is we really want to know, how is this going to affect them where it really matters? Out on the golf course, is this going to affect, is it going to affect how far they hit the ball? We obviously think that's a pretty easy one to answer, but then what else is it going to do? Where are they going to hit the ball? What's it going to do to their scoring? So I think there's a lot of cool questions that we're going to be able to answer in that. Before we get into all of the heart of the data, just so everybody knows, we're going to go through some information here first. If you have any questions, please open the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom screen and just type those questions in there. Kyle Shea is going to be in the background answering a few of those that he can answer easily. And then we'll answer a bunch of those questions live as well toward the end. For those of you who don't know, I'm Mike Napoleon, one of the founders of SuperSpeed Golf. We're joined here with Tyler Standifird, who is an associate professor of biomechanics at Utah Valley University. I think I got all of that right.
Oh, well done.
But Tyler has been doing a lot of research for us over the last couple of years, and as he alluded to, this is kind of one of those pinnacle studies that we've been really excited to present to the world now for a long time. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get a little presentation up. And Tyler and I are going to walk you through some of this. Like I said, ask some questions while we're going. We're going to be happy to answer those as long as it takes. All right, all that look good? So, before we get into some of the detail of this particular on-course study that we looked at, from the golf coaching perspective, I think that on-course performance is something that, I think it gets missed way too often in common instruction programs. When we were running our academy for years in Chicago, I think transitioning new things out on the golf course was something that we always really spent a lot of time with, because if you're not going to see actual performance results from the things that you're working on in your golf game, what's the point? I just that really is one of those questions that I've always had a hard time with answers that I've heard from other people on that, consistently. It's like, we can make the golf swing look as pretty as we possibly can, but if that golf swing isn't going to help you hit the ball farther, hit the ball more accurately, or at the end of the day lower your scores, what's the point in what you're doing? And we were always very specific, whether it was Kyle working with people on the physical side, taking very close measurements of range of motion or strength values or things like that, or me working with players on the game side, looking at their statistics and really knowing are the things that we're doing helping them get better. So that's one of the big overviews. Now, this study involved overspeed training. So this involved our standard level 1 training protocol with SuperSpeed Golf. And that protocol, and really all of our primary 3-club training protocols that we have at SuperSpeed, the backbone of that is neurological training that affects motor units. So it affects motor unit activation, and it affects the expectation that a player's brain has on the speed their body is going to respond when you step up on the tee and make a golf swing. Now, this is, again, a very simplified, I would say, illustration of that process, but you have to look at the top of that chain, which are motor neurons in our brain that control and contain all of those different motor patterns that we may have. And when we select that motor program and pull the trigger out on the tee, a signal goes from our brain down our neurological system, arrives at our muscles, and our muscles respond. Well, if we, one of the things that we found in a lot of what we do at SuperSpeed is that what we're really training when we do overspeed training in its purest form is we're trying to change how fast or the speed that the muscles respond and make that a new expectation for the brain. So when we pull that motor program out, now it's going to be expected to run 5% faster than it did before. Now, what's really interesting about that is that if we look at that on a theoretical sense, if we're really not making major changes to a player's mechanics, we're not making major changes to the way they're swinging the golf club, we're just changing that expectation neurologically, in theory, we would expect that that change would happen not only in practice, but it would also happen out on the golf course. So this would be a form of training that, again, theoretically, should have direct transfer from what we're doing, in our practice sessions out on the golf course. And that's really one of the pieces that we set out to prove here, if you will, with this initial study. Now, I want to say that it's also very important that we look at other things that can affect on-course performance. And I also wanted to take this opportunity just to point everybody in the direction of our training site. If you haven't created a free account at our training site, there's a lot of great information there, not only on our training protocols, but also on our warm-ups. Again, I'm kind of taking some of the golf coach side here before Tyler gets into the details of how he did our on-course study, but warming up and getting yourself, I would say, primed for peak performance is something that we can use our SuperSpeed tools to optimize. And I think that's something that we've spent a lot of time on the last couple of years. We have a great dynamic warm-up on the website featuring Jennifer Fleischer from Fleischer Tour Fit, and she really walks you through how to get your body ready before you go play a round of golf or before you were to do speed training. We also have a couple really cool warm-up protocols that we've put together that these really would be in addition to the dynamic warm-up. So think about the dynamic warm-up as just getting the body ready, getting the muscles moving, and getting ourselves in a place where we can do physical activity. When I say priming the neurological system, what I'm talking about there is trying to get our body into a very consistent state where we have a very exact knowledge or an exact idea of how fast that club's going to move when we pull the trigger on different shots. And that's really what our level 1 warm-up protocol and level 2 warm-up protocols do. You've seen this with a lot of great players out on tour that are using the equipment right before their rounds. That's really what they're doing. They're not doing speed training right before their rounds. They're doing this sort of neurological priming process to get themselves ready or honed in to get out there and function at peak performance. So check that stuff out. Just a couple more really.
I have to add real quick, Mike, just because this is something that I've thought a lot about, because I do a lot of athlete testing in my lab, golfers and then athletes from other sports at the university that I teach at. And I think it's pretty incredible to watch the different attitudes in terms of what they have to do to prep for the testing that I'm going to do. And sometimes I feel like as golfers, we tend to not feel like there needs to be this dynamic warm up to get the blood pumping, to get the muscles working, like Mike said, to kind of get to a state where we can expect a good performance. I think a lot of times as golfers, we just kind of say, hey, cool, it's time to head to the first tee, couple swings and get after it. And when I start looking at, forces that golfers produce in the golf swing and how fast they're producing these forces, like these are up on the same rates as my basketball players, my soccer players who are cutting, landing, jumping. And so the body is working like an athletic body. And so I think it's very important that we treat it as such as we get ready for the event.
Yeah, and I would add, when we watch PGA Tour players get ready for a round, I think it's actually even interesting. I played golf with our operations manager, Harley Abrams, a few times this year, who's a very good player. He's a +5 handicap, played golf at Lehigh University and Northwestern, very accomplished amateur player. His process probably takes him a good hour before a round to really get ready and go. And I would say tour players are definitely in that range, but there's something to be said for that. Now, all of us aren't going to have an hour and a half before a round to go get ready. A lot of times we have much less than that amount of time. What we've tried to do with SuperSpeed is, do this dynamic warm-up protocol that I would say probably takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And those warm-up protocols probably take 5 or 6. So if you can give yourself 15 to 20 minutes before a round, I think we can optimize a little bit of what we're going to do.
Yep.
Next thing that I want to look at, and these are a couple other of those coaching pieces that I just think are good nuggets for those of you out there, maybe down in Florida or Arizona playing golf right now. Make sure you're hydrated. I think this goes without saying on every single sport, but I can't tell you how many times I've had a high level player, call me or text me after a round and say, man, I just didn't have it today. Something just didn't feel right. It's just like everything didn't feel right when I was out on the course. And, the kind of things that we ask that player first, they don't have to do with the golf swing. The first things we ask them about are, well, how'd you sleep last night? When did you get up? What'd you do before the round? How much water did you drink? Did you go through the normal protocol? What did you eat that day before the round? What did you eat on the golf course? Because honestly, those type of factors have a much bigger aspect on the day-to-day of how a player is going to perform on that day than anything that's possibly going to change in the golf swing overnight. Those kind of things with mechanics do not change that quickly. So this is a really common one. Again, more on that coaching side. I think it's really important just to consider. But I'd say let's get into the good stuff. Well, those are really important things, and check that out and look and make sure you have a plan. But let's really talk about what we did to measure how we had how we were able to actually test on-course performance before and after speed training. The first piece of that puzzle was with a partner of ours from the UK, ShotScope Technologies. And ShotScope makes some really cool equipment that allows players, not only to use a rangefinder and get yardages or use a GPS, but also to geotag every single shot that they hit on the golf course. So we know where every shot started from. We know where everyone landed. We know every piece of data possible about each one of those shots. Tyler, you want to talk a little bit more about how you guys integrated ShotScope in this?
Yeah, and so this was kind of the name of the game, right? We needed a way to measure what was actually going out on the golf course in an accurate and consistent way. And I think that's the beauty of kind of what ShotScope has done, is they've been able to kind of map out these courses. It was great because I was able to work with ShotScope and tell them the courses that my participants were going to be playing. And so we made sure we went into those courses. Everything was updated really well. They were great to work with in that end. And this was basically them, putting these tags on their individual clubs. And then they could utilize this as part of our baseline assessment. Because that was really key. Before they ever actually spent any time in speed training, I wanted to know not just how fast their clubs were moving, but I also wanted to know out on the course, how far were they hitting drives, what were their scores, what were the things they were doing in terms of fairways hit and things of that nature. And so ShotScope was something that we utilized to not only get those baselines, but then also to return after the 6 weeks of training to see what had happened as a result of that training.
So to give people just a broad overview, number one, of how difficult it is to do a study like this, but this was a group of golfers who, we needed to have a few rounds before we started. Then we had them track every round they played for a full month, correct?
Yep.
After they collected that baseline data. So Tyler got data in his lab on swing speed and forces and all the other cool stuff that we like to measure. But then we sent them out after training them how to use ShotScope to collect the baseline data on those rounds of golf that they actually went and performed for a full month. Then we had those players go through our level 1 training protocol for 6 weeks, brought them back in, got the data, got the speeds, got all the forces and everything, but then had them go back out on the course and record rounds for another month, so that we could see really what we saw before and after that speed training on what happened out on the golf course. So you want to add some to that?
Yeah, a little bit of, just as you kind of have some questions, because, I understand in studies like this, they're big, there's a lot of moving parts, there's potentially a lot of confounding variables. And that's why we tried to pick a group of golfers that was playing the exact same course. This was a group in a men's league near a course near me, where they were playing golf probably 2 times a week. So a lot of these guys, we were getting 7-8 rounds of golf in that month. In Utah, I tried to, because we actually have an off season, so I tried to wait until they had come out of the off season. I didn't want the pre-rounds being in March, first rounds out, and then the post rounds being in May or June, and knowing, well, hey, they just got better because they played more golf. They had been playing a lot of golf before. This was a group that played a lot of golf to begin with. And then we had them go out and do that training. And again, there were some difficulties, but I feel like we tried to control as much as we possibly could in this research study. when they did finish, the 6 weeks of training, when they were doing it 3 times a week, when they went into this month of post testing with the on-course statistics, I instructed them to just kind of enter one of our maintenance phases. So I didn't want them to be training the 3 times a week and kind of experiencing these additional speed jumps. I just instructed them to do that level 1 protocol 1 time a week and do that for the extent of the study, so that we could get all of that data without those speeds either jumping even higher or with them kind of coming back because they had stopped training completely.
Right, which is our standard protocol.
Exactly.
Once you get into season, generally speaking, we're going to be in a maintenance phase of the training. I mean, some people do this during season 2, which is perfectly possible. But, we like to, especially for players that have events that they need to peak for performance on, we want to be in those maintenance phases of the training during those periods of time. So I think that's pretty standard. Well, why don't we start talking about what we found?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this is one of those ones. Yeah, swing speed. And this is the thing that I love to see, Mike, because I feel like I see this pretty much every single study that I've done, which is we see somewhere between 5 to 7% swing speed gains in those first 5 or 6 weeks. I think these are true gains. These are gains of them actually hitting a driver with a ball. So this is them actually kind of hitting these. They went through the exact same dynamic warm up. I got them at the same time of day. Same number of golf balls, same intent with the driver. Everything was held consistently, which I always try and do in my studies. And the same thing comes out again where, hey, great, these guys picked up, a little over, 6-ish miles per hour, which happened to be about, 6-ish% for them.
Yeah, which again, we see that pretty consistently. And this was just, to be clear, this was data that we collected in the lab after the training, correct?
No, I did some stuff in the lab for this study. These swing speeds are ones I actually did out on the driving range at the golf course, going pre-post there.
But just to be clear, this wasn't on course.
Oh, no. Yeah.
This part of it wasn't on the golf course. This was at the driving range, just collecting post data.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, swing speed going up by about 5.5%, 6%. That pretty much falls in line with the other 50, 60,000 data points we have that show that's pretty much our average. So I'm not shocked to see that, but I think the next pieces of data are ones that are new because we really have never tested this stuff before. So why don't we look at driver distance? You can talk about this a little.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, give you kind of a little bit of a view into what ShotScope does in terms of how they track data. And I've really been pleased with how the devices work. A lot of good feedback from the participants. I use this device for almost 3-4 months before I even started the study, so I would know how to use it really well. And what they do with clubs is they give 3 different things. They give an average distance, a performance average, and a longest. I think the longest is pretty easy. That's the longest shot that was recorded with that club during the time that you were looking at the rounds. The average is really any time you use that club, whether you hit it great, whether you hit it poorly, that is the average. And then the other thing they do is they do this really nice performance average, which what they're trying to do is kind of push out some of the outliers. So if a guy who normally hits it, 270 has one that goes 325, they wouldn't analyze that one. Same thing for a guy who normally hits a 270 and maybe they hit one off the toe and hits a tree and it goes 190, that wouldn't be analyzed either. And so this was one I will say, right, remember this is done in Utah at 4,800 feet elevation. So if you're looking at these distances thinking, man, and these were a group of good players, right? They had good swing speeds. They were good players. And in Utah, you can see what I love to see is those averages, performance averages, longest, all of them have that uptick of between about 12 to 15 yards. And these were out on the course. And so we can see here, the average went up 13 yards. Performance average was about 14 yards. The longest was just under 10 yards. And again, you see those percentages where if we really focus on the average and performance average, because we know golfers are going to bang one out there no matter what every now and then, or catch wind or a good bounce. But to see those percent changes be right in that 5% area, that's the stuff I love to see, because while it's cool that their speeds go up, it's great that their force production on the lead leg improves. Ultimately, what I want to see is that out on the course, they're hitting the ball further. And we see that 5% gain in distance with the driver as they were able to do the training.
Yeah, I think those are really cool results, showing that, again, and that, that 5 or 6% gain in swing speed, really does equate to almost a 5% gain in actual distance out on the golf
Yep.
course. I think that's a really cool number.
Yep.
You know, I think maybe the coolest part about this study is going to be what we look at next, and that's actually looking at accuracy. So we know these players hit the ball further, but where did it go? And ShotScope was able to tell us where every single one of these balls ended up, whether it was in a penalty area, whether it was right down the center of the fairway. We were able to see all of that. And this might have been the part that we have theorized about for years, that as a player becomes more athletic in the way they swing, as their swing becomes more efficient, most of our intuition would say that even though they're hitting the ball farther, they should be becoming, more accurate. They should be able to control the ball a little bit better because of that increased efficiency. Well, here's what we saw.
Yeah, so this was a cool one. As Mike said, we were able to tease out fairways hit, left and right percentages, penalty percentages. And again, what you can see here is the actual percentage of fairways hit increased 10%. Now, again, this was when they pulled out the driver. What we really wanted to tease out in this study was when they're hitting a driver and the hole allows them to hit a driver, as opposed to holes where maybe they have a forced layup of some sort, right? So these are all driver swings. They were able to increase fairway percentage by 10%. And that came from less misses to the left, about the same misses to the right, and then maybe a slight decline in the penalty area. And so what you can see here is those percentage gains going from 40 up to 50%. Little drop in penalty and right almost non-existence, but that left kind of get that drop down. We were also able to see some things, Mike, too, which I didn't have this here in this table, but you can go into the nitty-gritty details and see actually how far away from the center they were missing. And so the question, always becomes, well, pre-training, did they miss the fairway by a yard and they just improved it there? Those kind of, I guess, metrics of how far they were offline, everything kind of improved. Everything got a little bit tighter as they started to hit more of these fairways.
And honestly, like the left percentage versus right percentage, in my head makes a lot of sense right away. Mainly because, a lot of the players that start doing this training, as they go through overspeed training, they will tend to be rotating a little bit more aggressively. They tend to be, as we've seen, use the ground a little bit better, sequencing a little bit better. So many of those terrible left misses tend to be issues with using the ground or sequencing. So as that becomes more athletic, I'm not shocked to see that a player that had tendencies to miss left is probably going to, miss, if anything, kind of get rid of that miss. And, players that may have a tendency to miss right, I think rotation is probably going to not change much either there. So depending on who you're starting with, I think that one makes a lot of sense when you start to look at it more from a coaching perspective. I just think that's really cool, though. So, longer and straighter, I mean, that doesn't suck, right? I'll bet these guys are pretty happy with that, right?
Oh yeah, that's the fun part. I mean, the funnest part of my job, Mike, is when these golfers come back in after, and before we've even looked at any data, they just start spouting off these things that were happening on the golf course. Hitting it past their buddies, scoring better, having more birdie opportunities, reaching a par 5 and 2. I mean, those are the things where, at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And these golfers, as a result of the training, further, straighter, more opportunities for birdies, less bogeys. And that kind of leads in, I guess, to this last piece, Mike, which is you could imagine if they're hitting it further, they're hitting it straighter, score, which is a big thing, kind of what happens in terms of that data. And so what I did with this one, I really got maybe kind of geeky on this one a little bit, where I basically, you can get the average score to par based on the associated misses. And so what I basically did is kind of took how many they missed in each area. So how many shots did they put in the left rough, fairway, right rough, and penalty. And then I could actually take out these statistics and figure out what their average scores were based on these different misses, look at their overall scores that they posted as well. Again, when they're using this driver in hand. And you can basically see that, again, drastic improvements in kind of when they're in the left right, or in the left rough, some improvements in the fairway. Right rough, a slight uptick, penalty, big drop because they weren't hitting it in the penalty as much off the tee. And then you can see that total gain of about between 2.5, 3 strokes gained, which I always like to see stuff that lines up with other things that I read in the golf literature. And this is about the number that you see them report. If the average golfer could gain 15 yards, they should theoretically, gain probably 3 strokes out there, and this is what we saw.
Awesome. I mean, that's where it really matters, right? Score at the end of the round. So I think that kind of caps everything off that we have to say. I'd love to get into some of these questions now. Kyle, I don't have them up, so if you want to hit us.
Yeah, Tyler, can you several questions explaining a little more about this study as to handicaps, kind of age ranges, skill levels of these players?
Yeah, for sure. And you might guess by some of the swing speeds and distances you saw out there, these were and guys who are playing, 8 to 10 rounds of golf in a month. These were players who were playing a lot of golf, had played a lot of golf. The age range of these golfers, the youngest was, I think, 37, 38. The oldest was just under 50. So kind of right in that maybe 38 to 50 range. Average handicaps, we were kind of high single digits. So I think 7-8 was kind of the average handicap of this study. And yeah, I think does that cover those things they were asking, Kyle?
That popped out at you. These were the big ones. Is there any other things you wanted to share that was cool that's more in the nitty-gritty data that you saw?
Yeah, again, so I kind of got to go through golfer by golfer, shot by shot, which was a lot of fun. And honestly, we're still kind of diving into some of this stuff with ShotScope as well. But one particular golfer, he was one who really struggled with some big misses pre-training. And he was probably our highest handicap in the study. I think his handicap was 13 or 14. He was a golfer who his whole life had been trying to break 80. That's like his number one goal. He told me from the start of the study. And as I looked at his pre-data, again, he would have these big misses that just would cause all sorts of issues with his game. He was able to kind of tighten those things in a little bit. He gained a lot of speed, gained a lot of distance, was able to get things closer to the fairway, and broke 80 for the first time, which, again, I think those are the things that are just really cool to hear.
Mike and Tyler, can you see these? We're looking for, is a junior warm-up any different, I guess, than an adult warm-up? And then how should their swings be? Are they all maxed out on each swing? Kind of what's the cue there for them?
Yeah, well, during the training, so I'll answer that second part first. Yes, during the training, each one is a max out swing. The reason we call those last 3 max out swings, it's more of an intent piece, because at that point in the training, most players are starting to get a little bit fatigued because they've gone through, the 36 swings of that protocol already. So we just want to, I would say, put that back in front of mind that they should be maxing out those last 3 swings in the last 3. We've just found that to be an effective coaching tool. But yes, every swing during the protocol, we should be trying to go at our max. As far as the warm-up for a 10-year-old, I think the dynamic warm-up applies to juniors as well. You could do other more fun things, if you will, with them. I mean, have them run a sprint, or have them do some jumps, or there's other things you could do that would be very similar exercises to what's in there that may just be more fun. And then I'd also recommend that level 1 warm-up protocol for juniors. Kyle, while we're doing this, I can talk about that top one as well. We can get it out of there. About you being more comfortable with non-dominant swings. I've always said that if you're really uncomfortable with doing non-dominant swings, that's a big potential gap for your ability to, I would say, improve coordination and sequencing in your golf swing. It's also a big potential gap for speed. When we work with elite athletes, we see them, I would say, typically within about 1 mile an hour of the same speed on both sides. Most of them, if they're actually a right-hand dominant player, can actually exceed the speed that they swing on their right-hand side. They can exceed the speed on their non-dominant side many, many a time. And that we see, I would say, throughout a lot of other sports as well. So that's a big piece to consider. But, Tyler, you want to talk about a little bit of like your transference training that we talk about a lot, which is almost like reprogramming the brain on the non-dominant side, going through sequencing to see positive effects on the normal side?
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I had an experience yesterday in my lab. I'm actually starting a brand new study. Just had my first participant in yesterday. and he was a 77-year-old golfer who was doing the non-dominant swings. And when I tell him to swing fast on the right side, he takes the swings, no problem, he does it. When I switch him to the non-dominant, it's really cool to watch those radar numbers start to jump really quickly. It's cool to watch him think through that process. And when we're doing overspeed training, the idea is how can we enhance the activation from the brain talking to the body in a simplistic way. And there's so much good research to say that one of the best ways to do that is through this approach called the dynamic systems theory, which is basically how you kind of change up the activity you're doing just a little bit in a way that kind of engages the brain and engages some of those motor cortexes a little bit more intensely. And so those non-dominant swings are such a key part of that. And if you're talking about comfort, it's buy into them, do the swings, figure out how to make those things fast, pay attention to your body. The transfer will come, and there's some incredible physiological benefits to the muscles when you start utilizing them in both directions that are key to the non-dominant training as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. Think of it like you're trying to make your body solve the problem in a different way. And there's good stuff that comes out of that.
Tyler, a couple more questions just to get these out of the way about the study itself. We had a question about, for the pre and post, what was the N number for each group? I think that was
yeah, so there were 11 golfers in this group. Again, these are the kind of things that as we work with ShotScope, we have some plans to expand this in the coming summer season in Utah, but 11 was the starting group, which from a statistical standpoint, if you like jargon like that, in terms of statistical testing and power, was sufficient for some of the things that we did and found statistical significance for these results. But of course, we're excited to do this with more players in the future.
Okay. Tyler, also a couple of questions on the ShotScope technology, asking how new is it, and does it detect, how does it differentiate between practice swings and real swings?
Yeah, so in terms of ShotScope, so I don't know when they first came around, to be perfectly honest. In terms of the detection of the clubs and the practice versus real swings, and kind of the on-course editing and things like that, it does a really good job. That sensor has a little bit of a communication to, the one I used was a watch. So you wore a watch and then you have the tags on the actual clubs. And so the nice thing is when you have that abrupt impact with a golf ball, it finds a little bit of an acceleration to detect some things that take place. And so again, it's really good software. The post-round editing, it would take me maybe 3 to 5 minutes to post-round edit. And literally this quickly, I would have every single data metric that you could find on the PGA Tour stats. And I could also group myself based on handicap levels and see how I'm progressing. And again, pretty impressed with how it works.
Yeah, I think he may have been referring to accuracy. What do we find as far as accuracy level of those geotaggings out on the course?
Oh, of them, I don't. That would probably be a good question in terms of kind of what ShotScope is looking at in terms of those accuracy numbers. But I would, again, just in my own experience tracking my own game, like I was incredibly impressed with. Hey, this is where I was. I would shoot some yardages, write them down, and then go back to the round to see how far it thought I was from the golf or from the hole. And almost every single time those are within just a few yards. So pretty good stuff.
Yeah, and we definitely encourage people to do some type of tracking. So you guys have heard of ShotScope. There's Arcos out there. Someone asked about if it compares to the Golf Metrics app. There's Decade. Tyler, do you want to just talk a little bit about each, or how that compares to like a Golf Metrics or Decade type app?
Yeah, again, this is one where, you don't have to do it because you have the tagging out on the course, right? You don't have to go back and do very much except for a few little edits here and there if it missed a shot, which it will from time to time. Or if it thought you were on the edge of the green chipping versus putting, you have to maybe just let it know if you were on the green or not. And so, there's some differences there. In terms of Arcos, again, probably most similar to that in terms, because they both are doing the tagging. I know ShotScope does not have a subscription fee. Which, again, if you like that, not like that, that's just something that is different. I'm with Kyle where the coolest thing for me as a golfer, because again, I love all the science stuff, I love the training, but I'm a golfer at heart. I loved actually going in and seeing, wow, I really struggled between 50 and 75 yards. That's how much you can get into the details of your own data. And that allowed me to kind of key into some things in my own practice and kind of watch those metrics improve over the course of the year, and then watch my scores improve as a result, because I could really target where I was struggling out on the course relative to my handicap.
Perfect. Mike, I'm going to kick these two over to you about training 5 to 6 days a week versus 3 times a week, as well as if somebody's doing the training protocols, how long do they go? They go forever, a period of time, maybe talk about the cycles.
Well, first of all, 5 or 6 days a week is too much. We've kind of researched that ad nauseum at this point, but the full day off in between sessions is a very big marker for getting maximum results out of this. This is not like strength training. This neurological speed training it's a less is more type of piece that requires some time off in between those sessions to really max out what you're going to get out of this training. It also helps players, I would say, not go through the motions in this training. It helps them really make sure that each one of those swings is at maximum intensity, which is really the key there. As far as doing this ongoing, we have 3 training cycles. So each one of those cycles involves, a primary training phase is about 10 weeks long, and then a maintenance phase that could be at least 4 weeks, but up to most of a season that we see with a lot of our players. Most players will do it at least those 3 cycles in a row, whether that's one season after another, or maybe, do that training, take a maintenance phase for a month or 2, do the next training. It is certainly possible after you've done the 3rd training cycle, if you wanted to take a little break from it, I think that would probably be the time to do it. And then, when you want to reinvigorate and get back into that process, there's definitely good. But one of the things that we see with a lot of our professional players that have been using these products for, 7-8 years now, is that it's just what they do with the training. It changes. In 5 years into this training, there is diminishing returns in getting these big jumps in speed. You're probably not going to see another 5% jump in speed out of the blue 5.5 years into the training if you've been doing it consistently for that point. However, what a lot of these players do find is that those pre-round process, those pre-round warm-ups, like that level 2 warm-up protocol, that priming type idea that they're getting themselves into a very consistent point where they have the exact number of motor units firing in their body that they did the round before, helps them add a major point of consistency to what they do out on the golf course. I think that's a key point to this whole on-course performance thing. So we recommend following the system exactly as we've illustrated it on our training site and going through those training cycles. And again, over time, if you get done with the level 3 training cycle and you want to do it again, absolutely get into that primary cycle, stay with the level 3 training cycle. But again, what you're going to find is that you're not going to be getting huge jumps in speeds 3, 4, 5 years in. You're probably going to be using this more before rounds with those warm-up protocols in order to really prime the system.
Thanks, Mike. This is for both of you guys. We have several different questions about various pieces of the technology we use. So we have a lot of you familiar with our PRGR launch monitor. We also have our new partnership with Blast and the app, and then we work with ShotScope as well. Can you guys talk about how each one of those might fit for the various player, or how they could choose which one they might want to use? And then maybe ShotScope is added in if they wanted to take that more on the performance side, as well as what the 3 ShotScope products are.
Yeah, I think we're looking there at just what level of data do you want? How does your brain work? Do you like to see a lot more stats? Does that help you? Or do you like to just really keep things simple? I think PRGR is definitely the most simple piece on the spectrum. It's just a very simple device. You put it down to the ground, it tells you how fast the club moves, with or without hitting a ball. It's a great piece of technology. Now, it's not going to give you information on hand speed or anything about club path or any other metrics except for how fast the ball goes, or how fast the club goes, the ball goes, and some calculated distance and smash factor numbers. I think if you want more data, if that's something you like, and you like more of that kind of app-based experience that'll auto-track everything that you do, that'll give you the ability to go back and check reports and show exactly how your progress has been, I think the Blast Motion piece is great. again, now you're Bluetoothing a sensor to your phones. There's a little more involved there, but it'll walk you through all of our protocols, auto capture every one of those swings, and it's a great piece of technology if you want that extra data. I think ShotScope just kind of takes that to another level. Like, it's not going to help you with feedback in your speed training, but it may be able to show you exactly what's going on with your game out on the golf course. Tyler, you want to add anything to that piece?
Just with ShotScope, I'll point out, and they kind of have three main products. So one is a range finder with an attached kind of GPS kind of device where you would have to like actually manually touch the tags from the end of your golf club to it to register that you have that club. Another one is a device that you can put on like a belt, where again, same process where you would have to have a tap of that device to then kind of register that that's the club. And the one that we used in the study was the watch-based one, where you do wear a watch, and then it does do the auto detection of the club, just because of some additional technologies with the watch paired with that, because it can get some movements there as well. And so again, I think as Mike pointed out, the big thing is, you know, being able to measure what you're doing in your speed training via PRGR or blast is a huge way to get that feedback, to know what is fast for you and what feels fast, and ensure that training. And I think the ShotScope is really maybe this added component of, you know, being able to look at and say, wow, I'm hitting 2 less clubs into the green than I was before, or dive into those details on where you want to focus your practice. I saw someone chatted in and said they gave their ShotScope data to their coach, and because they were consistent in collecting it, their coach was really able to target a lot of what they did in their practice to try and improve those things they were doing. So again, I think, as Mike said, it's how much data do you want to kind of help you enhance your game.
And for those that are interested in the ShotScope has a code for us, ShotScope 15 on our website, if you're interested in taking a look at any of those 3 products. Tyler, there was a great question about measuring on-course speeds that ShotScope obviously doesn't. Could you talk a little bit about how Blast does that, and a little bit about what ShotScope does compared to Blast? I think that's a really great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Blast has a really cool feature where there is an offline mode, where basically what you can do is just put the cap and the sensor in your driver, and then basically you can play an entire round of golf, and then go back in. As you open back up the app, it will basically take all of those swings that you made with that driver out on the round, and you can see kind of how your speeds change throughout the round, or what you did on a specific hole, those kind of things. So that's kind of what Blast does. Really great opportunity. If you get, you know, I know some players will get 2 sensors because they want to track all the putting metrics that Blast will give for every putt, plus the driver speeds. And so they put them on both of those clubs and keep them on it. Right, that can be a cool thing also if paired with ShotScope, because ShotScope is actually measuring the physical distance of the carry plus roll of every shot, where it actually ended up. And so being able to pair some of those things with the swing speed and then the distance, and kind of get some measurements that way. The other thing too, Kyle, that I've actually started doing in my game, and encourage players who come into my lab to do as well, is even with the PRGR, right? If you take that out on the course during your practice and play, set it up on just a couple of holes every round, and get some club speed, ball speed feedback, and start recording that a little bit. And because I find that a lot of players tend to struggle transferring things out onto the golf course. We want them to feel comfortable swinging faster out on the course, and measuring that is a great way to ensure that you're doing that out on the course.
Surprised how many people have different speeds on the course than they do, on the driving range. So those different tools Tyler mentioned are really, really beneficial. Some players are actually a lot faster on the course, so quite interesting what you will see. Tyler, another question, or Mike, about tempo. Do we see any long or short-term impacts on tempo? And then maybe talk about how we can now measure some tempo, if that's important with technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need more data. That would be another good study to get more data on. I would say anecdotally, we haven't done a study on that, but in general, after going through speed training, we may see the tempo of the swing, or at least the tempo of the overall swing, not necessarily the percentages of it. I would say maybe increase just slightly. I think people tend to start swinging with a little more intent, a little bit more athleticism, which increases tempo slightly. I think it's particularly evident with players that purposely swing really slowly in the backswing. I've seen a lot of those type of players when they're done with speed training have a little bit less of that exaggeration. Tyler, could you? I mean, again, we haven't done a
Yeah,
study, but that's just
so
what I've seen.
I've pulled some data that we're talking about in terms of tempo, and what I really focused on a lot was what changes in some of the downswing times. So how long does it take them to move from some of the P positions, if you're familiar with those, or transition to club vertical, club parallel to impact. And I think what's been really, really cool for me to see is that what's actually happening is the club is taking a little bit longer to move from transition to club vertical, suggesting, that potentially these players are transitioning, sequencing a little better in transition. But then what happens is that club really speeds up from club vertical to club parallel. And those are the places where we want that club to start traveling fast so that it can get out to that ball and kind of get the energy. And so I have not looked at things with backswing tempo. I have that data, I could dive into it, but downswing, there's some really nice changes showing better transitions and getting that speed or that club moving fast where we actually want it to move fast and not that jerky transition at the top.
Leading into that, we have several kind of mechanical questions, which I think are great. Jim is having success with his driver, but it's not transferring into his irons. It looks like, I think we do see that sometimes. Mike or Tyler, you want to talk about that?
I think it's just really important to note that the golf swing that you use to swing a driver and the golf swing motor pattern wise that you use to swing a 7-iron is not really the same. So that means that those two are kind of different things and there's some intent involved there. Now we have seen normally that as somebody increases their driver speed doing speed training, that we will see a pretty consistent percentage-wise gain throughout the bag going down until we really get to, like, I would say wedge shots, finesse shots, because again, that's going to be a completely different motor program again. So we definitely see some transference typically over into iron shots. What I'd be curious of in that case, are you seeing a little bit more speed with like your 3-wood or your, hybrids? You're probably seeing a little more speed there. And then my guess is that the way you like to swing your 7-iron is just kind of that point in the bag where it is markedly, significantly, completely different than what you do with your driver. So that would be where I'd look there. I think you could potentially create a new motor program, learning how to swing your 7-iron potentially more aggressively. Not that it's going to be like your driver, but you could kind of do the same type of thing and learn a new motor program to potentially gain some yardage there on those lower clubs. There's also a lot more factors there that have to do with how that club's delivering into the ball. We may have some different impact conditions that are happening maybe inefficiently with those mid irons that, it's very possible to swing your 7-iron 8 miles an hour faster and hit the ball exactly the same distance. Just changing dynamic loft and spin rate and things like that. So a lot of different pieces there. We do typically see a gain throughout the bag.
And that was the reason why in this study, you'll notice a lot of my focus on this encore study was on these driver distances and accuracies. And part of that is because, this as a player that sometimes you might hit a little knockdown shot or get after this one a little bit more. And so, I think in terms of this study specifically, you're not always hitting your 7-iron at max capacity. A lot of times you say, I'm going to hit a 6, take a little bit off. And that's different than the driver, which you tend to, and we hope that players are getting up on that tee and trying to move it at max capacity, which is why our analysis focused on drivers.
It's funny, Jared says he feels like he's had the greatest gains with his irons. So I think that's kind of what you said, Mike. It can be player to player, but definitely kind of that club fitting side, dynamic loft side. I mean, impact conditions are.
There's just so many variables there. Like, I'd be curious, and we can pull some of that data on some of these different clubs to see. But again, my guess is that, we're going to see the biggest gain with driver, and then we're going to see, some amount of a gain down until we get to, those kind of, I would say, more controlled lower iron wedge shots.
Perfect. How about should beginners see a different increase than good experienced golfers, or say an experienced golfer that once had speed and lost speed, gaining that back?
Players that have lost speed due to some kind of injury that's no longer an issue, or have lost speed over time, tend to be one of the largest gaining groups that we have. And that's mainly because that player believes that they can swing that fast. They've done it before. So I think that's an easy one for people to break through with. Tyler, you want to add to the rest of that question?
Yeah, in terms of kind of beginner versus experience, there is, like, when I look at data, I always look at it and say, you know, what does this golfer need to improve to hit the ball further? And almost every single golfer needs to generate more force at better times. Now, again, there's varying levels of that, but I would say in my studies, I have beginner golfers who would gain lots of speed, and I have experienced golfers who gain lots of speed. I think the key really is that it's probably dependent upon some of their physical histories and histories that Mike's discussed. If I have players who've done no speed training whatsoever, I think regardless of their skill level, if they have a little bit of a strength base, they stand to be able to get gains regardless of how good their handicaps are. And again, I think in this study that I did, you know, the highest handicap player, I think, gained a little bit more speed than the very lowest handicap player, but they were quite similar to each other.
If somebody already has what they deem poor technique, poor mechanics, will this exaggerate that? Could it make it better? Can you talk about the different drill positions and why we put those in there? And then how would you combine this with, you know, mechanical or coaching during a speed training type of regimen?
All right. Well, I think this one could be its own webinar on its own.
Yeah.
But in the very briefest way to think about it, we're athletes that play golf. We're not golfers that try to mechanically put a golf club around us in a million different ways. It was also one of the things I almost answered in the last question to add in, is that some of the players we've seen the biggest gains with are those kind of overly technical players that are almost lost in the idea of where is that club in different positions. They've, you know, lived on video for their entire life, and they've really forgot how to use their body athletically to create speed. And when we measure those players on force plates and we measure 3D motion capture, we see all the telltale signs of those type of things. Because I like to think of the golf swing and the mechanics of the golf swing as being a result of good athleticism, efficiency, sequencing, kinetics, and all of those cool pieces that we talk about a lot in the coaching world. It's backwards to think that we don't like where the club is in a certain position and we need to fix that. We need to figure out what underlying cause is causing the club to move into that position by that point in the swing. So that's an overview that I would say is very important, because what I would say is that if a player doesn't use the ground well in their swing, they're going to have mechanical issues going on in that golf swing, guaranteed, or compensations. And if they do this training and they become better and more efficient at using the ground, a lot of those things may get better. Now, they may not know skill-wise how to use that right off the bat, but we're seeing improvements in efficiency. And I think that's a lot of what this on-course study showed, is that without specific mechanical training, just by going through these speed training programs, which we know help improve the athleticism and the efficiency that those players are swinging with, we were able to see a reduction in dispersion, an increase in accuracy and distance and power. So those things are all connected. So I am not on the side that I think speed training should not be done with beginners. Honestly, I think if a player started with speed training before they ever tried to hit a golf ball, when they actually got to the point of trying to hit a golf ball, they'd probably be in a much better spot than where most people start, which is hitting chip shots.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. How about several kind of senior players or older players asking, you know, what does the data look like for me if I'm in the 50s, if I'm in my 70s? Is there a expectation there compared to 35, 25, 45, anything like that?
I mean, again, Tyler can talk about this, but I think 50 and over is, again, probably one of the biggest gaining groups that we have. Now, I do think that that's a category that you may want to look at some of the other things that we do at SuperSpeed as well, besides just the standard 3 club training. I think there's a lot of times that the force pedal, the ground force stuff can be big there. I think our new squeeze product, looking at grip strength, can be very big with those players as well, and can potentially be reasons why a senior player may not be getting the speed they would expect. But aside from that, Tyler can talk about the studies we've done with those populations. Generally, they're extremely good results.
Yeah, we have data on a really big set of senior golfers, almost 50 senior golfers whose average age was 67, the oldest was 87, and the gains line right up in that 5.5%. I was going to add the piece of grip strength tends to be something that we really need to worry about with those older golfers. And the over 50 age range, the other thing you have to remember too is if you gain 5% over the course of a year as a 65-year-old golfer, you're probably up almost 7% on your fellow counterpart who did nothing over that time, right? They tend to lose the ability to move quickly more so than any other population. So not only can they do this and should they do it, and I think they have more to gain because they have more to lose if they do nothing.
The non-dominant training is also incredibly important for that population. We have a lot of players in that zone that I would say their bodies aren't working as efficiently as they used to. And I think some of the muscle activation that we get from those non-dominant swings, I think it's very valuable to their overall health, well-being, and speed.
No one asked this, Tyler and Mike, but there's other various speed training systems obviously on the market. Why do you think the results came out like this? Well, with the current super speed system and how it is, why did they gain more accuracy? Why did they hit the ball better? Why did their scores lower? If they could swing a telephone pole for all we care. What do you think led to that result that's really cool, not just increasing speed, but also all these other metrics that we're focused on?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the big thing is overall efficiency, overall athleticism. And, I think there's a few questions in there about, various other training products that are out there that do similar things with overspeed training. And I mean, again, overspeed training works. So if you get an overspeed training product, whether it's ours or another one, you're going to get positive results. I can just say this, my view of a lot of the other products that are out there is, we were here 5 years before any of these other products really came out. And we've had a lot of time and a lot of head start on getting a lot of good research on what happens with speed training. And I feel like most of these other products have tried to in some way differentiate what they do with their training or the type of protocols that they do or the way the system works in some kind of detail. They've tried to make something different than what we've had to differentiate themselves. And I mean, from a business standpoint, that makes perfect sense. I think, again, the training is so good that no matter what you do, you're going to get positive results. I can just say this, we started doing these studies back in 2012, and we found, I would say, the optimal weighting differential to get speed out of the largest number of players out there. We have been trying for years to find a more efficient way to do that than this 3-club system that we launched in 2014 after about 2 years of R&D. And I can tell you we haven't found one yet. And the day we do, we will certainly revamp stuff and create a new product. But again, overspeed training works. You're going to get results when you do it. We just feel like from a simplicity standpoint, we can talk complexity for years about what you need, optimizing this down to 0.5%. What we find though is that 3 clubs are better than 1 in a lot of sense because it's just easier to pick the next one up than to have to dial things around and change stuff on the weighting structure. And we find that getting through that training efficiently, it's just simple, easy, and it works. And that's kind of been what Tyler's found as well. It's verified a lot of the data that we did back when we developed the product.
Yeah, and I just might add really quickly, Kyle, just because this is some stuff that I'm currently doing. In fact, that I did this last week. I've been analyzing the data and have a big data group coming in, utilizing some of my new motion capture technologies to look at this data. And even just, Mike brought up the idea of the weighting system. And even just the other day, I was playing around with a participant, allowing them to go to these really light clubs and then some things where we added some weight to get some really heavy type clubs, just to kind of see some testing. And this is stuff Kyle and Mike had done already and told me what I would see. But as a researcher, I want to investigate this stuff myself. And so when I saw that these clubs got really, really light, I would see some things changing in the kinematic sequencing where that player started to lead with the arms and the pelvis and trunk are peaking post-impact with where the ball would be. And so, I'm excited to jump into this. I think it's stuff that Mike and Kyle, with the technology that they had when they developed this, saw some things and I'm happy to add to it and do that stuff. But I think the specificity to those driver weights and lengths and things such as that nature are really capturing proper transfers of kinetics and kinematics over to the actual golf swing itself.
We're going to stay and try to get through all these. So Mike and Ty, let's see if we can kind of knock these out quickly. Is there a optimal dynamic warm-up time that you found, Tyler?
I think the one that's online is great. I think it takes you through probably 7 to 10 minutes. Do that dynamic warm up. Treat it really like it is your exercise. So go after those exercises, do them right, and then go right into the speed training and do it every time.
Yeah, I look at that as a minimum. Look at that as a minimum, right? Like, I think, are there more that you could possibly do that may be even better? Sure. I think there are more things you can do in a warm up standpoint. I would love, as a coach, to have somebody go through a ball flight control program right before a round. I'd love to have somebody go, you know, really dial in their distances so they know exactly how far their, full pitching wedge is going that day. Like, there's a lot of detail stuff you can do. I like to think of that dynamic warm up plus that either that level 1 or that level 2 super speed warm up as kind of an optimal minimum for what you should do before a round.
Perfect. Mike, is there a limit to speed that someone can gain in the 6 weeks? Obviously, Tyler, I want you to talk about measuring correctly when people start their baseline as well, but I'll throw that both to you because it's really important.
Yeah, and that's the one, sorry, Kyle, about the question was detailed that can you gain more speed if you do it 12 or 16 weeks?
12 or 6 or 18, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the way to answer that first, and I'll let Tyler add to this, but the gains are not linear with this type of training. So you'll see a jump in speed of about 5% right after the first time you do the training. Now, it's not going to be permanent then. So over that primary training phase, which we've found takes about 8 to 10, as little as 6, as much as maybe 10 for some players, for that initial jump to become kind of a permanent fixture of your golf swing. Then we want to enter a maintenance phase where we're going to really let the body recover. And after that maintenance phase, the goal is to ramp the training back up to try to get another jump in speed. So it's more following the protocol the way we have that designed to optimize these periods of jumps, normalizations, and plateaus.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Kyle's point, in terms of what to expect to gain in 6 weeks, or could you gain more, those kind of things. I just want to ensure that golfers are making sure that they're measuring their speed gains accurately. I understand that everyone doesn't need to be at a university level research lab, and maybe you don't want to get to it at that point. But as I play around with these golfers and things like that, again, one great example was just yesterday, my data collection. I have a golfer do a warm up. I have him go on and swing some clubs at what he feels like would be something he would do out on a golf course. And then I try and have him do max intensity swings. And his speeds jumped about 5 miles per hour. There was a great study on that by My Golf Spy where they saw those same exact things. And so I just think as you're measuring your speeds along the way, be consistent in what you do, right? Same warm up, same condition in terms of if you're doing driver and ball pre, do driver and ball post. Just be really consistent, and for sure be consistent with your intent, because that My Golf Spy thing showed fluctuations up to even 10 miles per hour if you start changing the intent of how fast you're swinging. And we really want to make sure that we're being accurate with how golfers are measuring their speed gains. And so again, just keep that intent the same, keep the device the same, and whatever you're doing will work as long as you're consistent.
And Tyler, can you just quickly talk about some of the inflated gains you're really seeing out there just with the intent? It's just been a big thing right now that we're seeing a lot of.
Yeah, and I see that again. I'm in the Twitter world and the social media world, and it's fun to be in. It's fun to have conversations. I really enjoy doing it. But again, sometimes I see those inflated gains where again I can take a golfer into my lab and just and someone even brought this up. Maybe I think I saw this question, but if I give a golfer the light green club before they swing their driver and have them swing it 6-8 times and have them swing the driver, I can get them to increase their swing speed instantaneously by that. And if I make the baseline kind of this, suppressed swing speed because of a more reduced warm up or swinging a heavy club before it, because if you swing a heavy club before it, research will show that speed goes down. And then I introduce these light clubs, 6 weeks into the training, I can do those things and easily have speed gains really jump and become really eye-popping and impressive. And when in reality, all it is using these foundational principles of training and biomechanics and speed generation to kind of modify some things that way. And so again, I would just say, let's be consistent, right, with what we're doing pre and post so that we know exactly what gains are true and real.
Thanks, Tyler. Okay, Mike, do you see this next one in mental activation difference? Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really talks to what your goal is. Like, if mechanically you're trying to fix something in your swing, I could see there being some type of reminder there of a new position or a new move. I would also say that when we're doing speed training, we're trying to get that to, become more athletic on the golf course. I think a full speed practice swing is a really good trigger to get that new movement out of you. So I think triggering is what you're really after there. If you're going to swing a practice swing really slow, that's triggering you to swing really slow. So I mean, I think that one's kind of common sense in that sense.
Tyler, can you just briefly talk about those that aren't familiar with our blast motion for those that want some type of app?
Yeah, so the blast motion integration, for those who are asking questions about, again, it's a little sensor that you put on the top of the club via some kind of caps that go on those SuperSpeed clubs. We've worked with them to develop the ability to detect air swings with their system. And so again, it's really great because you can pop into their app, you can choose the level 1 training, it will key you into when to switch clubs, move that sensor to the other clubs. It will auto capture all of those swing speeds. And then again, you can kind of go back and look at things, see how your green club has progressed over 6 weeks and your blue and your red. It will even prompt you to collect some driver swings at the beginning as a baseline and then do that again throughout. So again, some nice integration to walk you through everything, auto capture, and then look at that. So again, if you're into really the data and maybe the auto simplicity of captures, that's a great option for you.
Mike, can you talk about speed training for juniors and the speed cycles there? I'll answer Dean's.
Dean, just make sure you do the speed training before the strength training. So warm up, do the speed training first, and then do your strength training. It's going to be optimal for you there. Juniors, yes. The answer to that question is just yes. You want to be training for speed all the time. Yes, there's a lot of information out there about specific windows of trainability when that player's body is going to, I would say, gain the most ability to create speed later in life. Those exist, but that doesn't mean that during a speed window you don't train skills. You still train skills during a speed window, and you still train speed during a skills window. I think it's really critical, that you're working on speed with kids when they're at their youngest ages. So like when you're dealing with your 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, like that's a time to be working on speed, jumping high, running fast, throwing things hard. I mean, I've got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old at home right now, and trust me, I love it when I'm seeing them, trying to see, how far they can jump, how far they can throw things. Frisbees are awesome, like anything that's going to promote speed type skills. But yeah, overall, the answer is just yes. You want to be training speed at all times during junior development. The times where they're going to get the most out of it, probably emphasize it a little bit more, which is going to be around that 4 to 7-year-old range, and then pretty much like early teens.
I'm sorry, I want to skip to these because a couple of questions about the squeeze, Tyler, and just talking a little bit about it. I know this isn't about that, but we have a couple of questions there.
Yeah, I'll just hop on. So we've talked a little bit about grip strength with senior golfers, and I know there's some questions out there on grip pressure and grip strength and things of that nature. And so again, what I've been measuring in my lab and what we've been trying to do is we recognize that amateur golfers really lack grip strength. This is especially true for our older golfers, but almost across the board. And so what the squeeze is really trying to do is trying to really target training for grip strength that's very golf specific. So not only can you do the traditional isometric holds of like you might have done it with a ball in the past, but you can actually swing clubs, and it actually helps you to feel when you kind of need to apply a little bit more pressure and get that a little bit more dynamic than just these kind of squeezes there. And what we find, and we want to make sure this is really clear, right? What we're not saying is that we want golfers to, grip that club as tight as they possibly can during their swings. What we're saying is that if I can increase the ceiling of my grip strength, what that means is I can apply a little less pressure, or how tight I'm gripping the club in a swing, but the raw value gets to go up. And that's really important because especially during transition, we need to apply a specific amount of force to create some good hand and wrist and club mechanics through that transition zone. So our goal, again, isn't to have you grip the clubs as tight as possible. It's to do some training where you're training that, and then that allows you to do some things in the golf swing that you weren't capable of doing before. And so there are some good measurement tools out there that are getting better. That's kind of a technology I'd really like to see enhanced in the coming years, which is the ability to in a really good way start to tease out grip pressures and forces at the various points of the grip. There's a few little ways to do that, but nothing is that I've loved enough to do a research study with it as of yet.
Thanks, Tyler. Can you briefly talk about injuries? If somebody's, what should they be looking for? I guess that's probably more specific with an assessment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest key there is what we talked about warming up. Like, I think people that try to do this cold, that's definitely not recommended. The other thing that we generally would see is that the only real injuries we see a lot of times from this training is with a player that already has an injury and just tries to do this even though they're just kind of playing through it. That also we wouldn't recommend. But in general, we don't see a lot of speed training specific caused injuries for a player that isn't injured prior to doing the training, mainly because there's no impact involved in our training. So there's not a lot of residual forces going through the body there. So, this is kind of safe even to the point that we use a lot of this in rehab training with a lot of players coming off of injuries.
Yeah, and I'll say, maybe this statement gets old, but I love to put data to this stuff, and I think SuperSpeed's been really great to encourage me to do that. And so this was one Mike pointed out, the idea of a really good proper warm-up before you speed train. I do have some data on that from a group of golfers that I sent surveys to that were speed training. And when you account for the idea of doing a proper warm-up, the rates of injuries and pain in that training almost disappear. Those who don't do the warm-up report a little bit more discomfort, and I think those with previous injuries. But if you're healthy and you're cleared to go and you do the warm-up, we just don't see injury rates skyrocketing as a result.
How about this one from Joseph? Mike, reason they're swinging the heavy club just as fast or faster than the light? We definitely have seen people.
I think we just talked about it. I think it's a really, really good key in that grip strength could be a problem here. That the other thing that I would look at in there is swing type. We generally see those clubs moving at a more similar speed if it's a longer, I would say just a longer overall golf swing that focuses more on kind of ramp up time or impulse force to get the club moving versus having a lot more of that kind of lower body ground interaction sequencing kind of move. I think that definitely kind of fits in there. Tyler, have you seen?
Yeah, again, I would go back to the sequencing. I would look at kind of the way that they're generating speed and the way that they utilize the ground. And I tend to see that players who are utilizing the ground really, really well and have some good sequencing that way, and these, I don't know, what we would describe as these really powerful, forceful swings, they tend to move that red club pretty well. And I think could even maybe start to move it up to the levels of some of those others. So again, that swing type and sequencing with the ground and kinematic plays a huge role in
that. Frederick, just about the variations between those.
Oh yeah, I saw that in terms of percentages. What we typically see with a driver, and again, I think it takes a little bit for that player to unlock what they're doing speed training wise, because speed training is a new skill. But I think after, you've been, doing maybe a week or so of training, what we like to see settle in is that green club's going to move about 20% faster than your driver. The blue, maybe somewhere between 15 to 17% faster, and the red, somewhere between 10 to 12% faster. And so again, easy math, 100 mile per hour swing speed. We'd like to see green around maybe 120, blue in the 115, and red, maybe 110 to 112. Would be kind of the appropriate speeds we'd want to see.
Perfect. Two good questions here to finish up with. Mike, about if someone's using ZEP or Blast or anything else that gives you more metrics, when are those important? Should be people looking at those? Or
I think unless you're a coach, I think those are maybe items that are telling you, what you're doing in your swing. They're not necessarily metrics that are telling you why it's happening. I think it's really key that if the speed is going up, the club speed is going up, something is becoming more efficient. Now, you may be able to track all those metrics and see which ones improved in your particular case. Again, we may have a player come in that uses the ground extremely well and doesn't lag the club well at all. And after the training, they're still using the ground well, but so they haven't seen a huge gain there, but maybe now they're creating much better sequencing with their hands and arms. So I think if you want that data and you want to track it, I would say use it just as an explanation of why the performance result went up. But I think players would get way more out of only looking at the performance results and not worrying nearly as much about why it's happening.
On this one with James, I think it's a great question. So some of you guys might remember Rory talking about speed training hurt his game. You also may have seen how great of a season he had last year, how he's actually gained more speed. So I think that's somewhat been debunked out there. He actually has both the C Club, the SuperSpeed set, and the PRGR. So we do know he has that. But I think it might be a good one for you, Mike, about.
Yeah, I think this is a tough question because, again, perception from a tour player standpoint, perception of what's going on at a current point in a training program that's affecting their overall game, it's just difficult because it's almost like they're too close to it. They're too inside of the process to be able to very accurately speak about the actual progress that's going on. I mean, it may have been a situation where the way his coaches set out his fitness training regimen, his speed training regimen, what they're working on mechanically in the swing, all of those different aspects, may have not been working together optimally, at a certain point, and he was getting upset about that. But over time, we've seen with whether you're an amateur player or one of the best players in the world, speed training has positive results. And I think the amount of players, even a player like Rory, who may make a statement like that, over time ends up seeing and reaping the benefits from that same training that may have on that day not felt as productive.
And I think even maybe James pointed out, Kyle, that he wasn't feeling that in his own training. And I think part of that is our amateur golfers, right? They maybe aren't getting over enhanced by all these things. They're a little further away from the situation. And I think really what we see and what we saw with the ShotScope on-course study and the things that I'm seeing in my lab and like you said, the things that you guys have done before I ever came along and the tens of thousands of users have seen is that this does transfer well. It does lead to improvements in what they're doing, both with the speed and out on the course too.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I know we've got a ton of questions answered. We also have the recording going out to everyone who registered. Tomorrow, it'll also be on our YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, we have all of our old webinars on there, plus a lot of great other kind of long form educational content. So if anyone wants to check that out, just SuperSpeed Golf on YouTube.
All right. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll be back next time.
Thank you.